My name is Trish Baker. I'm a TV writer, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. My mom was a stay-at-home homemaker, and she is very good at it. And my dad, until he retired, was an aerospace engineer. Neither of my parents insisted that college was crucial to success in life. My parents were more about figure out what you want to do, something that you like to do and that you're good at, and pursue that. And if it involves college, then great, go to college. But it wasn't necessary in their view. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go to college because I enjoyed school and I was a good student. My father had to tutor me in trigonometry and pre-calculus so that I could qualify to get into the University of California. And my father was one of the very first people to point out to me that, yeah, you're not going to be an engineer. Or, I'm not riding on a plane that you build. So I got that message very early on, and I knew that was not the path for me. I wasn't going to be following in Daddy's footsteps. Very early on, I showed a bent for literature, and I wrote poetry that was published in the school paper, and I wrote stories that won prizes. And my parents were very proud of those accomplishments and were very encouraging. They knew that I wanted to do something with words, and they felt that that was legitimate and that I could make that work, and they encouraged me in that. I went to an academically competitive high school. I went to public school in Los Angeles, and the school I went to was very much a desired destination for parents to put their kids who wanted a top-notch education but for some reason didn't want them in private school or didn't have the means to send their kids to private school. When I was in high school, I was already starting to find my voice as a writer. I worked on the school newspaper and I loved it. I would write anything. I'll cover the story, I'll cover the football game. Oh, there's a poetry contest, I'll enter that. If I stayed after school, I was working on the paper. And at one time I thought that I might become a journalist. When I was in high school, I loved my English classes. I did all of the required reading and then some. And it wasn't difficult for me because I loved it. I think that it's hard to like things that you're not good at. I find liking something and being good at something, they generally go hand in hand. On the flip side, math was difficult for me and I didn't like it. And I had to get a lot of tutoring in order to pass my classes. Besides working on the school newspaper, I didn't have many hobbies that were related to the school environment. I read a lot outside of what was required in school because I loved it. And high school was also the time when I became interested in old movies. When I was in high school, I started learning about movies, and I became that person who would set her alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to watch Meet Me in St. Louis on a local station. I would watch anything that MGM produced during the golden age of movies. And VCRs were very new at the time, so it was difficult to find a lot of the movies that I was interested in. Living in Los Angeles, there were a lot of local TV channels that played a lot of old movies. So I would set my alarm and get up and watch it if it was something that I really wanted to see. The $1 Million movie, you know, it's starting at noon, and oh, I really want to see that. Wow, you know, Mickey Rooney, I love him. The only way I can see it is if I ditch school and go home and watch this movie. I went to college because I loved school, and I wasn't disappointed. I loved college. I cried my eyes out when I graduated because I was not relieved to be done. I would have stayed 5 more years if it had not become, ridiculous and unseemly, and if my parents would have bankrolled it, I would have stayed forever. One of the reasons I enjoyed college so much and got so much out of it is my parents didn't put expectations on me that I was going to college to find a job. As far as my parents were concerned, I was going to college to find a path in life, and that's very different from finding a job. They encouraged me not to worry about what I studied, what I majored in right off the bat. They felt that that would all come in good time, and they encouraged me to take anything that interested me, and I did. I was an English major, and I took a lot of literature classes, but I also took anything that looked slightly interesting in the course catalog. I would sign up for that, because odds were you needed an elective in that discipline anyway in order to graduate. I even took math, and I had had a lot of struggles with math in high school, but once I was sort of freed from the idea that if you don't pass this, you're not going to college, I did a lot better in math. I did excellent in math in college just because I was taking it to see if I could sort of lick it, and because it was more interesting to me than taking it for a grade. My parents were willing to bankroll any public university in California that I could get into. So that ruled out Stanford, and that ruled out USC because they were expensive private colleges. So I was looking at the University of California, which is a public university. My father went to UCLA, and my older brother went to UCLA, and I visited UCLA, and I was terrified. I wanted no part of it. I couldn't believe it. I might as well have been in downtown Rome. It seemed, I didn't even know what language people were speaking, and it seemed so cosmopolitan and so huge. I was terrified. I visited UC Santa Barbara, which at the time was about a third of the size of UCLA and had a much more homey feel, but it was still a very good school in the University of California system. And it was also far enough away from home that I could live there, but if I felt I needed to be home to do like emergency laundry or have an emergency meal, I could be home in about an hour and a half. So that was the school for me. As far as educational credentials or licenses, TV writing is the Wild West. You can be a high school dropout and become a TV writer if you're talented enough. Lots of TV writers go to college, plenty don't. Lots of TV writers have some college, not everybody graduates. One thing that was surprising to me is I thought I would join a writing staff and it would be like, hello, fellow lit nerds, that everybody would be an English major and want to talk about the subjunctive mood. There are no English majors in TV writing, except for me. There might be a couple more, but TV writers come from every academic discipline imaginable. Membership in the Writers Guild is mandatory. You can't join the Writers Guild of America until you're a writer. So somebody besides the Writers Guild of America has to tap you with the wand and hire you on a writing staff and say, you're a writer. We're buying this script from you. We're paying you to write. Then the Writers Guild comes to you and offers you membership. Most studios and production companies in Hollywood are signatories to the Writers Guild of America. That means they have agreements that anybody who works for them on the writing staff will be a member of the Writers Guild. I think something that helped me down the road in becoming a TV writer is that I came from a very sort of male family. I have 2 brothers, although when everybody gets together with family, it seems like I have 6 brothers. And we had a very loud dinner table, and it was difficult to be heard, but I made myself heard. And that has stood me in good stead in TV writing, where it's not unusual to be the only woman in a room full of 7 or 8 men. I'm very comfortable in that situation, and it isn't difficult for me to, no matter how many times it takes until I'm heard. I think I'm very lucky in that I had the support of my family in the years I was struggling to break into TV writing. I work with a lot of people who come from all over the country, and it can be really lonely when you're 22, 23 years old to pick up and move to a new city. And if you want to be a TV writer, you must move to Los Angeles. There's no negotiation. That's where the TV business is. I was very fortunate in that I grew up here and my family is here, and it can be a very discouraging business. And I think one of the reasons I succeeded was I was able to stay in the game long enough to get a break. And I think I was able to stay in the game a long time because I had the support emotionally and sometimes financially of my family until I could get a foothold. I don't know what it's like. I don't know how people do it. I mean, people do it without their families, but it is very difficult. After high school, I went to the University of California at Santa Barbara, and I was an English major. I read a lot of books, I read a lot of plays, and I started writing. I had an idea that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't quite know how to make that happen. I don't come from an entertainment industry family, and I didn't have any connections. And I didn't even realize there was a difference between television writers and film writers, and there is. But when I graduated, I took whatever job I could get in the TV business. I was a production assistant, which is a gopher. As a production assistant, you run errands, you fetch coffee, you do whatever they tell you to do, and the hope is it's legal. After I had worked a few years as a production assistant, I learned about a job called writer's assistant. A writer's assistant on a half-hour sitcom works in the room with the writers. A writer's assistant types the changes to the current script and issues a new script, in most cases on a half-hour sitcom, every night. Your grammar and spelling have to be top-notch to make it in that job. The reason being a writer's assistant is a terrific entry for an aspiring TV writer is you're actually working with the writers on a TV show. And you're actually working with writers in a writer's room and learning how to be a writer in the writer's room. I don't know how you get that education otherwise. And I was very fortunate to be hired by the executive producers of the TV show Home Improvement to be a writer's assistant. I learned a lot the couple of years that I worked on that show, and eventually my bosses promoted me. And that's how I got my break. I think the path I took to becoming a TV writer was pretty conventional in that I started working in the entertainment industry right out of college. And I became a writer's assistant as soon as I figured out that that was a way to get in. My recommendation, if you want to become a TV writer, is to become a writer's assistant on a TV show as quick as you can. It's difficult because nobody wants to hire a writer's assistant who's never been a writer's assistant. But the way to be in the right spot to get a break is maybe to already be working on a show. Take any job you can get. Be the guy that gets the coffee for the writers. And someday, a writer's assistant is going to call in sick, and they're going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, do you want to try this? And if it works, you're on your way. A TV writer writes the scripts for scripted television shows that you watch. A lot of us also write scripts for reality television. Most reality television is scripted, and they use a lot of writers. When you're a TV writer, 75 to 80% of your time is spent in a chair at a conference table with a dozen other people, yakking all day long, telling jokes, telling stories, rewriting in the air, and trying to make a story emerge. My job is to give the actors something to work with. My job is to give the actors something that makes people laugh and something that's entertaining. The people who watch TV don't sit down and read scripts. They're meant to be played. And my job is not a performer. I'm behind the scenes. Television writing is both an individual and a group process. You go off by yourself in a room and crank out a draft of something, but then you bring it back to your peers, and that's where it's game on. Scripts get rewritten in a room full of writers. A room full of comedy writers is a wonderful place to be. It's fun. It ups the quality of your work because it isn't just your peers criticizing you. They're pitching jokes to make your work better. A week in the life of a TV writer is very structured because a half-hour sitcom is highly structured. Monday morning, you sit down with the actors and they read the script aloud, and you listen and you hear what's working and what's not working. And the hope is everybody is laughing. But if it's not working, after the table read, the writers immediately begin to work on what can we make better about this script that the actors are rehearsing right now. And while the actors are rehearsing, you're rewriting. And the hope is that on Tuesday, when you watch run through, you've made it a little better the night before. By the time you get to Friday, you're going to tape that script that you sat down to read with the actors for the first time on Monday morning. And Friday night, it has to come together. Friday night, you have to be done because the cameras are rolling and the network is expecting their episode because you have an air date, maybe 6 weeks from now. So it's a Monday to Friday process on a sitcom. I interact with other writers. Some writing staffs are quite large. There could be 12, 13 writers. I interact with the actors. Actors need to discuss the material, and they really like to discuss the material with the writer who wrote it. So very often a writer will be down on stage where the actors are rehearsing, helping them over any questions that they have about the script. I also interact with network personnel. The network personnel is the client, and they get to have scripts the way they want them. When a network representative calls and has notes on the script, when you're the writer of that particular script, very often you'll take the call and address whatever concerns or changes the network has. When you're a writer on a TV show, your physical workspace consists chiefly of a room that all the writers can fit in and a table big enough to seat everybody. The walls are covered with index cards, and that's where you spend the majority of your time. You might also have a little satellite office with a desk and a phone and a computer where when you're off writing a draft, that's where you go. You also spend time at least a couple of times a week on the stage where the actors are rehearsing or taping the show. TV writing is a good fit for me because I'm qualified to do very little else. I figured out pretty early on that I can read and synthesize a lot of material and talk about it succinctly. I think that the first clue that you might be a writer is, do you love reading? Do you love hearing stories? Do you love hearing the same stories over and over? I do. Do you like telling stories? And can you put it in an order that makes sense and is entertaining, and other people want to hear what you have to say, other people want to read what you write? And I figured out pretty early on that I had that interest, I had that inclination, and I pursued it throughout my education. The best part of the day as a TV writer is getting a big laugh from your colleagues. If you can make a room full of hardened, bitter, angry, competitive TV writers laugh almost against their will, you have something. You've done something. And it might be just one joke that the whole day that you pitch that works, that goes in the script. But I think if you can do a joke a day, you've earned your keep. It's very difficult to get a break. It's very difficult to get your first job. The thing that I found that was very difficult about breaking into TV writing is there's no set path. If you want to become a doctor, you know when you graduate from high school what you need to do to get there. You need to go to college, you need to go to medical school, you need to do a residency somewhere. But to become a television writer, there is no set path. People come from all walks of life. They come from other careers. They come from different aspects of the entertainment industry, and nobody can tell you how to do it. Everybody who sets out to do this blazes their own trail. I sort of knew when I started out in this business that it was hard and it could take a long time to succeed. I thought, well, I'll figure it out and I'll be the exception and I'll be the overnight sensation. I didn't get paid to write until I was almost 30 years old, and I was pretty discouraged toward the end. To work as a professional writer, there's a certain skill set that you need that isn't negotiable. You need to be literate. You need to be able to quickly construct sentences that work. Your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation need to be spot on. Having an agent represent your work can be invaluable to getting work, but it's really difficult to get an agent if you don't have any experience. I got a break and was hired to write for a TV show, and when that happened for me, agents came and looked for me, so I was able to get an agent that way. Some people are able to get attention for their work by winning fellowships. There are lots of organizations in Hollywood that sponsor competitions. The Writers Guild runs a few of them. Some of the big film schools in Los Angeles run competitions, UCLA, USC. That's one way to get noticed. There are a lot of different yardsticks for success. One is your colleagues like the work you do and tell you that. Another is the show working? Are people watching it? If enough millions of people are watching your show and you get renewed for another season, that's success. There's a lot of work in television now, and I think there's going to be even more in the future. When I was coming up, cable was just beginning, and now I don't even know how many channels I have, and every single one of those channels needs a constant stream of new programming. And whether the channel advertises itself as a scripted channel or a reality channel or a sports channel, all of those channels, all of those shows employ writers. So there's a lot of work. Reality TV came along at a time when ratings on the traditional broadcast networks were declining. And declining ratings mean decreased revenue. And reality TV is a lot cheaper to produce than traditional scripted television, which makes it very attractive to TV producers. All reality shows still tell a story in the half hour or the hour that's allotted to the show. That hasn't changed. The episode has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the hope is you have compelling characters with something to say, with a story to tell, or nobody's going to watch. And that's true whether it's a scripted show or a reality show. So there's a huge demand for writers who know how to help people tell their stories. And that's what we do in reality television. You need to be familiar with the great drama of Western civilization. You should take Shakespeare. You should read a lot of Shakespeare, because half-hour sitcoms are 2 or 3 act plays. By dramaturgy, I mean what makes a scene work, what makes a scene alive. A guy walks into a room. What does he want? Can he play the scene by himself? Sometimes an actor can come into a scene and play it by himself. Hamlet did it all the time. But generally, there are other people in the scene. What makes that scene come alive? Conflict, or comedy, or both. Comedy comes from conflict. So basic dramaturgy is the superstructure of how what we see on TV and the movies holds together and how it moves forward. All plays have basic dramaturgy in common. And if you want to learn basic dramaturgy, the way to learn that is to read people who knew basic dramaturgy. Shakespeare knew basic dramaturgy. A person comes into a scene. What does that person want? And you have to be able to answer that question. A scene has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you think about it, it's pretty self-evident, but you need to think about it. I started thinking about that sort of thing in college. Why does this scene work? Why does this scene not work? By the time you're beginning to sit down to do your own work in television, you have a substantial grounding in the basic vocabulary, in the basic idea of what you need to do here, the difference between a scene that works and a scene that doesn't work, a scene with a purpose and a scene without a purpose. If you're interested in being a TV writer, it's never too soon to start thinking about that stuff. Start thinking about it in high school. And the way you start thinking about it in high school is you read. Read everything. Read novels, read short stories, read plays, go to plays, watch movies, watch a lot of TV. Begin absorbing it. It's like learning a language. Writing for TV involves really long hours. It takes a lot of patience and stamina to get a draft done in a given amount of time. You never have enough time to do your draft. If you would like 2 weeks, you get a week. Working in a writer's room on a show in a professional situation, maybe rehearsal didn't go very well. You guys have about 10 hours to rewrite that script. So you're going to stay in those chairs until it's rewritten. It can involve all-nighters. It's really important that you get enough sleep and that you eat properly. A lot of writers drink too much. A lot of writers get involved with drugs. I think a lot of that is a product of the difficult hours. But if you know going in that there's that danger, you can avoid it and stay healthy. I think the best moment for me professionally was the first time I wrote a script on staff and I went to see that script produced in front of a live audience. And my parents were there, and my brothers were there, and my friends were there. And I was sitting with the other writers sort of off to the side because, I mean, my job was done. I mean, now it's up to the actors. But the warm-up guy who brings in the audience and introduces the show and tells them what they're about to see introduced me. And that was unexpected. And he introduced me to the audience as the writer of the episode. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't a fraud. Like, yeah, I did write this. And I also almost fainted. I had to sit down very quickly. It was overwhelming, but it was really a wonderful moment. Writing for television is quite lucrative if you can get a job and if you can stay on the air. And that's the trick. TV writing is seasonal and it comes and goes in waves. And there could be long stretches where you're not working. So until you land your next job, it's important that you figure out how to plan for the lean times.